Welcome back to Success to Series, the spin-off show all about Hollywood's hits, winners, and triumphs. I'm Trev, the mighty Michigander Snyder.
And I'm Chris, the Italian stallion Sorgiovanni. And while there won't be much of a rumble this episode, I just can't wait to celebrate all things Rocky Balboa.
Yes, that is right. But Chris, before we move on, I know you were very kind to present me with my boxer name for this episode, the Mighty Michigander. That was your recommendation, and I know you wanted to take on the Italian stallion, and of course you are Italian, very proud of your heritage, makes sense. But I was thinking, that one is kind of taken, right? Like sure. by the titular character of the franchise we're looking at today. So I took it upon myself to come up with a few suggestions for your boxer name.
Okay.
I just want to run these by you, all right? The Lame Duck Canuck, the Edmonton Ignoramus, and Chris, no movie before 93, Sorgiovanni.
That's the best one. That's
the best one. Yeah,
that's
okay,
that was great. That's great.
But as you just mentioned, this is a very, very fun episode for us because every once in a while we need this kind of mental break. We need to say, hey, let's stop looking at trash or movies that like we're going to argue about. So generally this podcast is failure to franchise, and we watch movies that failed to start franchises. That's the whole concept. But a while ago, we decided to occasionally do Success to Series, where we take an opportunity to talk about some actual franchises that did launch, that did take off, and in particular, ones that we're fans of. So we can, kind of contrast what went right. What did these do well that all the other movies we look at, failed miserably at? And we are in the middle, or actually it's kind of still near the beginning, of our Fall Back to the 80s series. So for this 3-month series, we're looking at all 80s films that were failed franchise starters. And we decided to mix it up and throw in a Success to Series. And we had some discussions about different 80s franchises. And ultimately, we decided to run with one that we're going to have to defend a little bit as an 80s franchise, but I am ready to defend it. I think you are as well. Because we're talking about a franchise that does have 8 films and only 2 of them are in the 80s. But we will explain why we think, and I do believe, a lot of like the mainstream audience, if you ask them, what decade do you associate the Rocky franchise with? I think a lot of people would say the 80s.
Oh, yes.
And we'll talk about that. But yes, we are looking today at the entire Rocky franchise, which of course consists of 6 Rocky films and now 2 Creed films with a 3rd on the way.
Yeah, so please put your electronic synthesizers away and don't try to hit us over the head with them because we will defend why we have chosen this franchise. Trev, can I go a little just first off the bat? We're a little this episode, by the way, or this spin-off show is a little loosey-goosey. I know we mentioned the first time we did one about James Bond, so I just wanted to, just in case this is their first episode of Success to Series, they're just a little bit less structured than Failure to Franchise, where we do a lot of history, a lot of factoids, a lot of quotes. This one's more of a conversation, so just get that out of the way. But my history with the Rocky franchise is actually quite new. Like you said, my wrestling name is No Movie Existed Before 1993, and in some ways I am extremely shameful to agree with that. And the Rocky franchise, it just kind of, I don't know if it surpassed me as much as I don't want to say avoided, maybe ignored it. And I want to kind of defend myself a little bit here by saying, out of the Sly Stallone franchises, I was more of a Rambo guy. There was discussion that we were going to do the Rambo series, and one day actually we will. I think that's a great series to do. So we're not going to talk too much about Rambo, but I just want to say I was more of a Rambo action, muscle man, gore fest, of course, explosions, Trev, of course.
Of course, yeah.
And sports films, I've only recently grasped onto. I don't know. There's sometimes there's so many sports films that all feel so samey to me, and they just kind of sometimes become too lame. And so I kind of just avoided these. My dad is a big fan of them, but not enough to own them or sit around and watch them all together. But yeah, so last year in February of 2021, I finally decided to catch up on the entire franchise. So I had never watched any of them, and that includes the Creed films. And I went in order of release, obviously, and just immediately. I mean, they're fucking classics for a reason, but I was completely enamored with them. and I watched all of them in a span of, I think, like a week. I just could not put them down. I really, really enjoy that, and we're gonna go on. We're gonna mention like the rankings of where we place the installments in the franchise for us. But I just found this series awesome, and I've always been a staunch defender of Stallone in his acting abilities, and I felt this watching his early days as this character was quite something. He really knocked me over with how friggin' good he is in this role. No wonder it stood this test of time.
Yeah, no, I remember when you were watching them all for the first time and that was kind of thing. I was worried that after binging them all in a week, you'd end up as brain damaged as Rocky is in part 5. But you somehow made it through, and this is obviously... I don't remember exactly... I was trying to think of this today. I can't go back and remember which was the first one I saw. Or what my initial introduction to it was. I know I saw 4 in the theater as a child, but I don't remember if I'd watched any others before that. So it's very possible that might have been the first one I saw. I'm pretty sure I saw some of the sequels before I ever saw the first one, which kind of makes sense, as I said, and that'll get back into what we talked about with like which ones were probably replaying more during the 80s, Yeah. But eventually, obviously, going back and watching the whole thing, Rocky is just one of those franchises that I feel like has been a part of my life for like all of it, right? Since I was a kid, these were around. I was I've seen everyone since 4 in the theater. Just like you, my dad was a huge fan. I think that's probably why I got into it.
Sure.
I'm not. It's weird because like I know I give off big jock energy. That's something our listeners always say. But honestly, I like sports movies way more than I like actual sports. Like the only sport I'm really a big fan of is hockey.
I was going to say water polo.
Water polo second. Right. But I also do. When I was younger, I actually went through a big period where I was a pretty big boxing fan. Me and my dad went to like a lot of actual boxing matches.
Oh, cool.
Got a lot of the big like heavyweight pay-per-views. Kind of fallen off that a little bit as to me MMA has gotten a little bit more interesting.
Sure.
So I watch MMA more now than boxing. But yeah, so I can appreciate a good boxing match, and maybe that speaks to because these are sports films, but you do get. You're talking about your need for action. You do get these like really kind of brutal drag down fights that honestly are like way more intense and insane than any real boxing match you'll ever see. And that might be part of it as well. But same thing. I think to just be basic about this before we start breaking down like more specific things, I think what's really fun about this franchise, and I like obviously, whereas we're talking about, I'm a huge fan of this franchise. I mean, I'm such a fan of Rocky that I even like Rocky 5, and
right.
we'll get into that. But this franchise is awesome in that it honestly didn't even have to be a franchise. Like we talk about movies that tried to start franchises and didn't. And I don't think when they made Rocky, they were really expecting it to be a franchise. Like that's a pretty singular story. And honestly, if there was only Rocky, I'd be happy with it because I still think the end of Rocky is perfect. But that decision to spin it into a franchise and what do you do? Where do you take this next, right? How do you continue the story of this boxer and his triumphs and his losses and everything? It's pretty interesting that I know there's a discussion, we're going to get into it, I'm sure, about how these are all kind of samey, right? There's a definite Rocky formula. And of course that's true. But I will argue that this franchise runs the gamut of a lot of different kinds of movies.
Yes, very
interestingly
much
so. enough. And so that's what I think also ends up being like very fun and very interesting. And I'm sure when you binged them all in a week, that became even more apparent. Stylistically, the first one is very different from Rocky 3. Rocky 3 is pretty different than Rocky 5. As you get into the Creed films, there's some repeating motifs and themes, but again, I think there's some differences. So I just think it's interesting that you can kind of see this evolution of this franchise too, in a franchise that easily could have just taken it easy and made the same film over and over. I know some people accuse it of doing that, but I'm going to argue that's not the case. And as we talk about them, I think it's going to be fun to look at kind of the differences and what each of them represents. And I'm with you in that. I really do enjoy Stallone as an on-screen performer. I mean, heck, I just said I defend Rocky 5. I'll tell you what else I defend. I like Oscar, the goofy like farce comedy he did where he's the gangster. Not the most amazing film in the world, I'll admit, but I think he's actually very funny in it. I think like Schwarzenegger, I think he's actually a very talented comic actor when he kind of puts his mind to it. And obviously he's got a really underutilized, for the most part, really strong dramatic ability, which you do see in the original Rocky, which I just think is an incredible performance, such a amazing, heart-wrenching performance. So Yeah, I mean, I guess we want to talk about more specific things, but yeah, overall, I love it for all those reasons.
You know what really struck me, and the through line through the whole franchise, up until a point, which we'll get to, and a reason why maybe I have some of my rankings where they are, is this movie or this franchise is it starts out very raw. You know, it's very raw, it's very unpolished, it's very indie. Like
yeah, like the first one really feels like one of those just kind of like really grounded character studies of the 70s, yes. Right? Yeah.
Yes, and what I was really struck with, especially because obviously we'll talk about the first one a little bit more right now before jumping into why we've chosen it in fall back to the 80s. But I think what I loved so much is Stallone being so goofy. Mm-hmm. Rocky is a goofy character. So when you think of, Rocky, Rocky's a tough guy, like on the poster, he's a badass, he's crazy. He's amazing, but he's at his core, he's very goofy, very self-deprecating. He rambles like I do. And like I just did. Sometimes you don't understand where he's going with things. He's very funny and he's just genuine. And I think the character just exudes that on screen, and that's the thing that draws Adrian, played by Talia Shire. It draws her into him. And for me, in the film, what really solidified my love and my absolute admiration for the entire franchise is their relationship.
Yeah.
Their relationship is something that I don't really know the history past last year. Okay. But I mean, like, people need to talk more about Talia Shire, and they need to talk more about Adrian being the heart and soul and the unsung hero of the Rocky franchise. Of course, we have a muscle-bound, jacked up Rocky Balboa, but Adrian adds such a sense of heart. She's so adorable. She is 1,000,000% relationship goals. She's supportive, yet she challenges Rocky through the entire franchise. And I think what we've said this a lot about a lot of narrative fiction is that there is always a wrench thrown into a relationship cog, right? There's always another woman. There's always somebody cheating. There's always something like that. And we always talk about, like, The Office is a prime example of that. There it goes off the rails. And how a show like Brooklyn Nine-Nine never does that. It shows just a genuine, great relationship that truly evolves into something lovely. And that's what real relationships do. And I feel like Rocky and Adrian are a perfect example of that. As that throughout this entire franchise, they hit hurdles, they struggle, there's drama, but they never hate each other. Mm-hmm. They always want to be there for each other. Rocky's never going to cheat on Adrian. Never. His eye will never look another way. And that's what really made me fall in love. Like, I'm getting goosebumps here. Like, they're so fucking strong in this franchise. And I think she's incredible. She's really incredible in every movie.
Adrian! Adrian! Adrian!
Rocky!
Hey, where's your hat?
I love you!
I love you.
I love you!
And the evolution of both those characters, right? Like, you can talk about the evolution of Rocky, but yeah, when you're talking about Talia Shire, look at the evolution of Adrian as a character, to what she is when we first see her, to what she is in her last appearance in Rocky 5. Like how much that character has grown. And I definitely think you're right. Like, we think of these as boxing films, and of course they are. And you would consider them like sports dramas first. Mm-hmm. But really, this is a story of this relationship.
Yes.
And the original Rocky, I would say, is not just, in my opinion, I think Rocky is the greatest sports film ever. I'll say that.
Yeah.
But I also think for me, it's one of the best. This is where so it's the greatest sports film, but it's one of the best like cinematic romance stories ever too.
Yeah.
And I think that's very, very important because you were talking about this character of Rocky and how goofy he is and everything. It really hinges on Stallone, and we should also mention Stallone did write all of these as well.
Yes,
he's the mastermind behind this franchise in general. It takes a very particular, very charismatic, very special kind of actor to make us like Rocky, because he is played pretty dumb in the first film, and he's a mob enforcer, right? Let's not forget that. He starts as a mob enforcer, but he's like this low-level boxer who loses most of his fights. He's like his best days are seemingly be coming up to be behind him very soon. Doesn't look like he's ever gonna, he's never gonna mount anything. And so he because he's not a professional boxer, he's more on the amateur circuit and just kind of a bum. Mm-hmm. He makes his most of his money as being a mob enforcer, but Stallone wisely makes him, dumb to the level of dumb to the level of sympathetic to one degree, but also so sweet that we see that like whenever he's sent to like break someone's fingers, he doesn't really want to, right? Instead, he'll give them like more time. He'll give them the out. And then the next thing that makes us fall in love with him is his relationship with Adrian. So his best friend Paulie says, "Look, could you like my sister? She's really shy. She's never been with like a guy because she's just so like kind of introverted, right? Mm-hmm. Could you just take her out?" It's almost like Paulie's doing it like, "Can you do me a favor, right? Can you just like be nice and take my sister out on a sympathy date, essentially?" And Rocky actually instantly kind of sees something special in her. Mm-hmm. Like he really likes her quite a bit. And the last time I watched it, I was kind of struck by it. There's a couple moments in it, with like, moments where like Rocky's kind of like not letting her leave the apartment stuff, which you could probably look at today. And I bet if it came out today, there would be some like calls of it being problematic. But again, because Stallone plays it so sweet, and so like you realize the reason he's doing this is he really sees something in Adrian that she doesn't see in herself.
Yep.
And he's trying to get that out of her. He's trying to help her like get past this like this shyness and really find herself, and he does. And even in the course of just that one movie, by the end of the movie, she's almost a different person because of what Rocky has seen in her and what he's helped her kind of identify in herself. And then that sets them off to go through the rest of the series. It's just this like great romance, and you see them both grow up. I know there's some I sometimes look at it as inconsistencies, but like Rocky's intelligence level from the first film to even part 2, it doesn't seem super consistent. But then you just wonder also how much of that is just him now, living with Adrian and how much she's been able to help him. And it seems like these are two characters who thrive together. So yeah, I love the relationship between them. And I maybe this is jumping ahead a little bit, but like the decision to lose Talia Shire from the series was always a fairly questionable one to me. Mm-hmm. I get where Stallone was coming from to some degree with his defense of it, but it was a shame because she's definitely a magical part of the series as well that shouldn't be overlooked.
Oh yeah, no, she's magical. I really do. Like I genuinely, as a viewer, fell in love with her. Mm-hmm. Just a romance for the ages, mm-hmm. and I'm glad you brought up the scene, of him not like letting her leave the apartment, because it's done so. Is delicately the word I want to say, because Stallone is or like Rocky is again, he's trying to get something out of her. Not, that sounds bad, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. Trying to get her like emotionally, but to break through. But he's also, because he's just a goofball. It mm-hmm. works. Right?
Well, yeah, like when we first see them together, he frequently goes to the pet shop she works in mm-hmm. to get food for his turtles, and just like the dumb jokes he makes with her to try and get her to smile, and that's where she's still like she's so unsure of this guy, and she gives him just like the littlest hint of a smile, and he sees something there, and he's like, okay, like he's breaking through that shell little by little, just because he has this like crush on this girl that works at the pet shop he goes to.
And I love just moving towards what we alluded to on the different kinds of movies in this franchise. What I felt, or what I really liked about the evolution of the character, is how many times Stallone wants to kind of go for a different theme, right? Mm-hmm. Like, let's talk about a little bit about Rocky V being the end of Rocky and Adrian, being the end of their era. And I found it was fascinating that Stallone taps into what physical strain and financial ruin do to these athletes. And that's something that I applauded Rocky V for, is that it goes into what athletes go through. Rocky was the biggest thing in the world. And then all of a sudden, he's nothing. And he's lost all his money. He's been taken advantage of. He's like, he's not doing so well. Isn't he like something's wrong with him, right? Like he's getting like medical attention in this one, especially.
He has brain damage from the Drago fight.
Yes, correct. And I thought that is a very astute point to put into your, at this point, and which we'll get to, kind of a silly boxing franchise. right?
That's why I've always and we're gonna we'll give basic quick summaries of the whole thing here in a moment, but I've always really defended Rocky 5. We'll rank them later. So it's not like I'm unaware of some of its issues, but I've always felt people are overly harsh on it.
Yeah.
And exactly because of what you just said, and that I think honestly at the time, I think a lot of people just didn't like it because you were coming off of the rah hooray nature of the previous films, and suddenly you have this really dour, kind of sad look at like what actually becomes of Rocky and his family. But what I appreciate about that is, I think you're just getting this a little bit. Look at like what really happens to a lot of these athletes. This is a very realistic story. There are a number of athletes who for a short time in their life, very successful, very wealthy. And then, it's always shocking to look at how many of those famous athletes today are, working 9-to-5 jobs. Yeah. Their bodies are broken. They have these intense medical bills, and never really had regular insurance because of what they did. They had to pay their own. They've been screwed over by accountants or by family in some cases.
They can't read like Floyd Mayweather.
Yeah. I mean, a lot. This is I find the story of Rocky 5 to actually be very, very real.
Yeah.
And the first attempt to take the series back actually to kind of the grounded nature of the first one after really becoming something else in 2 through 4. So I felt like Stallone was actually just trying to not reset it, because I really think he might have been at that time. I think he was viewing Rocky 5 as the end. Yeah. But to say let's bookend this with 2 kind of more realistic looks at what it's like to be in this world.
I think.
But maybe we should. Oh, go ahead.
I was about to say. I think this is a great time to actually just bring up 3 and 4. And why this one feels so weird compared to
before we get to 3 and 4, let's just quickly summarize the first 2. And I mean, not that I'm sure people, if I'm guessing most people who've listened to this have a sense of what Rocky is, but just to basically say, as I alluded to earlier, the first Rocky, which is a very kind of grounded, dramatic movie, is about this low level, not super successful boxer who is suddenly given the opportunity to fight the heavyweight champion of the world in an exhibition match. Why? Because the heavyweight champion, Apollo Creed, is being criticized essentially for just fighting all these these losers, and his fights aren't getting much attention anymore. And he's at the top of the world, but people are starting to lose interest in him because it's almost too easy for him. And so just to get a little bit more interest in his next fight, he comes up with a gimmick idea. He says, let's just find this little hometown scrub and give him this miracle opportunity to fight me, because he's so cocky, right? He's like, this won't be a problem for me, but it'll get a lot of attention. We'll get a lot of money off of this. And so it is this classic underdog story of what can Rocky, this guy who is barely scraping by as a boxer, suddenly given a chance to fight the heavyweight champion of the world. Now, it's not even a championship match, and that's what I love about it. It's just kind of this exhibition thing. And I think it has an incredible ending in that Rocky loses, but he goes the distance, and that's the victory. Yeah. Because everyone expects him to get knocked out in 10 seconds. And instead, he actually makes it to the end. And that is enough of a victory. And I always, like I said, if the series just ended there, that'd be great. Yeah. With Rocky 2, the first sequel, you kind of instantly felt this notion of, I think maybe Stallone did, especially following the success of Rocky, which won Best Picture. It won Best Director for John Avildsen. Stallone was nominated for Best Screenplay. So it was this gigantic success, right? And I think he instantly fell in love with that character. And I do think, if you want, there is an element of ego to him suddenly saying, what if I had won, though? Maybe Rocky should have won. And so part 2 is the rematch, right, between him and Apollo Creed. Because now he went the distance, now people want to see that fight happen again. And it is the rematch, and it's basically, Rocky 2 is more or less the same movie. It's about watching him train for the rematch and then the fight, and him now beating Apollo Creed and becoming the heavyweight champion of the world.
I just want to say one thing to my wife who's home. Yo, Adrian! I did it!
So now following part 2, you're not only leaving the 70s, but you're entering the 80s, but you're faced with the question of, what do we do with this series now? Because originally this was a series about this kind of regular Joe scrub who gets this opportunity and goes a different distance, and that's enough of a victory. Yeah. But now number 2, you've made it clear he is now a fairly wealthy celebrity, and he's the heavyweight champ of the world. So what do you do? And also, you're entering a new decade where movies in general are becoming more bombastic. It's like the decade of excess. We've talked about that in previous episodes. So what does Rocky 3 become? Chris, you want to talk a little bit about it?
Well, Rocky goes up against like villains now.
Yeah.
Like that's a big part of it. It's not let more. I mean, there's still an emotional through line. Don't get me wrong.
Of course,
and it's
there always
grounded
is,
by-
but it does kind of become a cartoon.
Yes. It's Monster of the Week. And with Rocky 3, I mean, it starts out with him fighting Hulk Hogan.
Thunderlips is here. In the flesh, baby.
Oh my God.
The ultimate male versus the ultimate meatball.
Playing his what is he playing again? Thunderlips.
Thunderlips, yeah.
And at this point, again, to cement it into the 80s, the WWF at this time is now gaining more and more traction, and Hulk Hogan is like at the height of his powers right now. And Vince McMahon actually didn't want Hogan to do the film. And Hulk was like, well, fuck you. I'm going to do it anyway. And I guess we learned that Vince McMahon has a hard time with people saying no to him. I guess we just learned. But yeah, you start out with him fighting this outrageous WWF character at this point.
Yeah. In a boxing versus wrestling match.
Yes. Oh, yeah, right. I
With, like,
forgot about that. I forgot.
And so here's the thing. But I will, again, people have like made fun of that, and people have said like, well, this doesn't even make any sense. Like, what's the rules? I will actually say, and I don't know if you know this, Chris, but that's actually based on a real thing that happened.
Oh, really?
In 1976, Muhammad Ali, of course, the greatest boxer of all time, probably one of the greatest athletes of all time, if not the greatest, fought Antonio Inoki, a Japanese professional wrestler, who had been actually taught like catch wrestling. So they had like a real match that was fought under special rules. And it was like an exhibition match, right? But the idea was, what happens when this, professional wrestler who knows kind of, college, Olympic type wrestling goes up against a boxer. And so it was just kind of this like media event. And I'm fairly sure that's what Stallone based this idea on.
Right.
But I think Stallone also wisely saw how professional wrestling in the 80s was starting to become this gigantic kind of pop culture thing. And so he decided to start that movie with this ridiculous, ridiculous fight against Thunderlips, which also, as you said, plays a big part in making Hulk Hogan a bigger star in the pop culture world as well.
And then enter Clubber Lang, played by Mr. T. Again, the second villain of the movie. So think of it in like superhero terms, listeners. Rocky, at this point in Rocky 3, is a superhero. Yeah. And he has to go through, your first little battle. You know how superhero movies do that? You fight the lesser tier villain first, and then you go on to the big bad. That's how this movie is structured. And what it does is it becomes just kind of a blast to watch, right? Mm-hmm. And right now, let's remind people that in 1982, Stallone is at the absolute height of his powers right now. Rambo First Blood actually comes out this year. Mm-hmm. So right now he's on cloud 9. I guess going into 4, obviously. But 3, what's cool about 3 is that it has the 2 title bouts. Like he fights this little exhibition match against Hulk Hogan, and then he goes up against Clubber Lang, and he loses, and then he has to go to his old rival to train him. Mm-hmm. And that's what's so cool about the movie is like, again, it's using Carl Weathers' Apollo in such a new, fascinating way,
Well, that's like, whenever that idea came to Stallone, that was obviously the magic moment, right?
Yes.
Because that's the real key to Rocky 3. Because if it was just a movie about, hey, Rocky's the champ now, but he gets beat and he has to come back and win, maybe it'd be okay. But the real secret sauce is that idea of saying, look, we just spent 2 movies not only with Rocky, but also with Apollo Creed. Mm-hmm. And Rocky 2 in particular actually showed a lot of Apollo Creed, because now we saw a lot of how he'd been humbled by what happened in part 1. And he's starting to be a somewhat different man, because he had to realize that, wow, maybe I was kind of losing it a little bit, and I was losing sight of who I originally was as a fighter. And so we've actually grown to respect him a little more. He's not just the villain that he seemed in the first one, right? So the idea of him coming to Rocky. So first of all, I love this idea of 2, former opponents becoming friends.
Yeah.
But also like that motivation of Apollo Creed saying, look, you're the guy that beat me. I'll be damned if you just end up like a one-fight wonder, because that makes me look bad. Right? I can't
Totally.
be beat by someone who couldn't really defend his title like that, right? So we're going to work together, and I'm going to help you become, the fighter I know you are, because I went the distance with you 2 times and you beat the shit out of me. So come on, let's get this together. And that the training sequences of them together are obviously incredible. And a big part of like what makes that movie sing.
And then again with the montages, right? Like now you're getting into the music. And we haven't even mentioned Bill Conti yet, by the way.
Oh,
but his
theme, I mean,
the Rocky theme is an absolute all-timer. It just, every single time you listen to it, you get goosebumps, you get jacked up, you get excited, you're like, fucking, let's go. And then now you're gonna add Eye of the Tiger.
Yes.
Like inarguably maybe, the most iconic sports theme of all time. You hear that song and you know exactly where it's from, and this is the movie where it starts, which is funny because most people think it starts, well, not most people, but I think people just, it's so synonymous with the franchise, but it didn't happen until 6 years into it, which is weird to think. I will say the weird thing about Rocky 3 though is that it does something with the score as well as Eye of the Tiger, and it does it in a it becomes diegetic in multiple scenes of the movie, which is a little strange that your iconic theme, all of a sudden bands are playing it. Solo did the same thing with the Empire, with the Imperial March, which is very strange to me. But again, it goes to the fun silliness that the franchise is starting to go into, because Mr. T, again, the main villain, is very one note. He just wants to beat the shit out of Rocky. Why? I'm not really sure. He just wants to win.
What's your prediction for the fight then?
Prediction?
Yes, prediction.
Pain.
He's kind of a mean guy, right? Like there's really nothing to him. With the Apollo Creed, he has a family. There's an arc going on here of why he wants to reach the top, why he wants to fight Rocky, why he wants to come back and train Rocky. But Clubber Lang is just kind of like the guy to beat this week on the Saturday morning cartoon.
What I love about it, though, too, is as cartoonish as it is and as ridiculous of a character as Clubber Lang is, you could make a movie called Clubber Lang that tells this story from his perspective.
Totally.
And he wouldn't be the villain, right?
Yeah.
Because it honestly is, as you just said, his motivation is just, I'm the new hot guy, I want to beat the champ, right? And maybe he's a little jerky, but ultimately he's just saying, look, I know I'm better than you, and I want you to fight me. Like, you're a flash in the pan. I'm the real deal.
Yeah.
So, like, he's only the villain because we love Rocky. Really, like that's the idea. You can still tell the story from his perspective. Also, as cartoonish as the movie is, there is still like an emotional through line to it. There is still real drama because this movie also gives us the death of Mickey, a character we haven't even talked about yet, but a key figure in the series. His trainer, played by the great icon Burgess Meredith. That's right, Penguin himself. When you think of Burgess, well, I know this is interesting because you just came to Rocky last year. So when you think of Burgess Meredith, do you think your mind defaults to Mickey or to Penguin?
Mickey, for sure, because I actually just realized he was Penguin.
Really?
Yeah. Well,
that shows how incredible of an actor he is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's funny that I don't think I've ever put that together, that he was Penguin. Wow.
I was reading this like great story about him where they said his grandchildren were telling a story about how he loved playing Penguin so much, and for years after the show, like up until his death, fans would send him like Penguin toys and things, and he saved all of them. Oh, really? And just had like the penguins like all over his house because he was like so proud of that role and just thought it was like such a blast to be in Batman.
That's cool.
But yeah, so he passes away after the first like Clubber Lang fight, and so now Rocky has to, and that's why Apollo Creed gets involved, right? Because now Rocky not only has to come back and win and recover from this horrible loss, but he has to do it without the cantankerous, mean but lovable trainer that had always gotten him to where he was before.
Totally.
There ain't no chance. There's no chance. Now he will beat you uglier than you are now. Now listen, you start fighting right-handed, and then you change sudden, and that'll make history. But first, you gotta get speed. Demon speed. Speed's what we need. We need greasy, fast speed.
And we haven't even said how much money Rocky 3 made. Rocky 3 actually makes double the amount of Rocky 2. So again, what we're talking about, the 80s, excess, money,
Yeah.
franchises, bigger, louder, better, everything, superhero, basically. This is now a huge blockbuster at this point.
Well, and this is the movie that cements it as a franchise, right?
Yes.
Because you could say Rocky 2 is, of course, that's where it becomes a franchise. Yes, technically. But as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, I think Rocky 2 could just almost be looked at like, well, maybe this is the story Stallone felt. This needs to have a slightly happier ending, right? This could have just been like these two like kind of bookends about this guy who loses the fight, but now he gets the belt, you know? But 3 really says, no. This is the continuing adventures of Rocky. And it's happening in a decade where now franchises are becoming a thing and people understand that. So I think probably at the end, like, you know, the moment the credits hit on Rocky 3, I guarantee you 95% of the audience is like, I wonder what's going to happen next. You know, who's he gonna face next? If I had a slight nitpick with Rocky 3, and this isn't even like a fair nitpick, it's not a real nitpick, it's more just like oh, that's interesting. It does do it starts. Well, I can't say it starts a trend, but it has 2 examples of something that drives me like a little crazy if you compare this to like the real world of boxing, in that there's no way the boxing world wouldn't push for a rubber match between Rocky and Clubber Lang and Apollo Creed. In both those instances, they've fought twice, and each one won one bout. You have to have a third fight. Yeah, because ultimately, Rocky really, you know, you can't say Rocky's the better fighter than Apollo or than Clubber Lang if you only beat him once.
Yeah.
And same basically with Apollo Creed. I know they have their third fight. I know we just don't see it, which I do love that. I love that as an idea.
All right. Ding, ding.
But still, I just think like the money that would have been left on the table by not having those fights. I don't think anybody would have allowed that to happen in the boxing world.
Totally.
Yeah.
And speaking of money, we go now into Rocky IV. And Rocky IV is the top grossing of the entire franchise. This movie, or this whole franchise, I guess, has a worldwide gross of $1.7 billion. Mm-hmm. And the high point was Rocky IV. And Rocky IV is now, let's just say it, this is pure 80s cheese.
Rocky IV might be one of the most 80s movies to ever 80s. Let's face it.
Non-stop montages, power ballads, a talking robot. It's got it all.
Do you think anybody like watched the first movie in the theater, in 1976 and walked out saying, that was pretty good. I can't wait to see that guy end the Cold War. Like,
Totally. And that's what happens, right? So he beats Clubber Lang, and now a new fighter from the Soviet Union shows up, and the ultimate villain of the franchise here is Ivan Drago, played awesomely by Dolph Lundgren. Yes. Let's just stop for a moment and talk about Dolph. Dolph has had an interesting career because this movie skyrockets him to stardom, but this guy just can't break through to the A-list ever. He is relegated to B-movie, direct-to-DVD, direct-to-video movies for the entirety of his career. And I found that quite fascinating because Dolph's actually he's a pretty smart guy, right? Isn't he like a physicist or some shit? Or
he's very smart. He's like a Mensa member. Yeah, he's got like a degree in like, I think like biochemistry or something. He's very, very smart. Yes.
Yeah. And it's the producers found him and discovered him and saying he was too tall, and then they hired him anyway. And what I mean like by too big and too tall, like Dolph is 6'5", Stallone is 5'10". He's a big dude compared to him. And in their filming, I found it was interesting. I actually didn't know this. You obviously did, but I didn't know this. That when they were filming their big match, Drago punches Rocky right in the chest, and I guess Dolph punched Stallone so hard that he almost died.
Yeah.
He almost died. I have a quote here from Stallone. He struck me so hard in the chest that my heart slammed against my breastbone and began to swell. So the beating became labored, and without medical attention, the heart would have continued to swell until it stopped. Many people that have car accidents die like this, when the steering wheel slams into their chest. So in a sense, I was hit by a streetcar named Drago, which I love. Like, that's crazy. I had no idea that happened.
Can you imagine how, like, horrible Dolph Lundgren must have felt in that moment? Yeah. And then, like, coming to set, like, once after Stallone recovered from that and be like, oh, hey, Sly. Like, just thinking, like, oh, my God, this is the movie that's going to make me. And did I just, like, not only end probably my career, but, like, kill the star of this franchise, this globally beloved, superstar.
Which is weird though, because Carl Weathers, I guess, didn't really get along with Dolph on this film, because again, I guess Dolph was way too over aggressive in their fight scenes, and like no shit. So I guess Carl Weathers I saw it before Stallone did.
Well, also there's like a new, but to Dolph's defense, he was new to all this. That's true. He's not an actor. He's doesn't really know how to do movie fighting and things like that. I'm sure these were real, legit, kind of just misunderstandings, and he probably just thought he was doing what he needed to do to make it look good. I just want to feed off what you said about Dolph Lundgren, because I love him as Drago in this, and I kind of echo what you say in that. Well, you said you just think his career is interesting. I'll say I find his career disappointing, actually.
Yeah,
I don't
sure,
mean
sure.
I'm not disappointed in him. I'm disappointed in how Hollywood kind of treated him after this, because I'm guilty of this myself. Like in the wake of Rocky IV, and he does some miscalculations, a couple of which we might talk about someday, and in fact one of which we might talk about in a couple episodes. But he has some miscalculations, and then he does get relegated to this straight to DVD world. And I think for a long time, I kind of was one of those people that would echo the general thought, oh, he's just one of those loser action stars, right? There's nothing special about him. And honestly, over the last decade, me and my friends would do these kind of bad movie nights, because as you know, we love just watching cheesy B movies, and so we started watching a lot of these Dolph Lundgren movies. And they are, they're hampered by their budgets. Many of them have really ridiculous plots. They're not the best movies, but the one thing you do quickly realize is that, dude, this guy actually always does have a pretty great screen presence.
Yeah.
And he is a very legit action star. And now I look back at it and I think I don't know that he has the acting skills that Stallone does. I don't think he's as charismatic as Schwarzenegger. But I think he's probably right there, in a world where Van Damme and Seagal both enjoyed, quite long runs as pretty big mainstream theatrical stars. Dolph Lundgren should have had that.
Yeah.
Dolph Lundgren is just as good, if not better, than those guys. And I think, big studio mainstream releases loss was the DTV world's gain. And the one thing is, there actually are a lot of really fun, DTV direct-to-video Dolph Lundgren movies that people can go check out. He's had a pretty prolific career. There's a lot of fun movies in there. But I do wish he would have had another opportunity to have kind of a big breakout role in the wake of Rocky IV.
Do you think because Drago is such an iconic villain,
If he dies, he dies.
one of the greatest in cinema history, do you think typecasting truly fucked him? And I know Rocky technically, Stallone could have been typecast too, but he had two franchises going at the same time that were wildly different, so it kind of helped him. But Drago is just very, I don't want to say one note, but he's kind of robotic in that he's he's actually genuinely scary. He kind of reminds me of the Terminator, but for the Rocky films, Yeah. And he's genuinely scary. I love all the high-tech Russian techniques that they use to train him, get him ready, and then in comparison to the really rugged analog versions of how Rocky is training, with wood and snow and a mountain, But do you think that Dolph was typecast? Do you think he just could not get away from the shadow of this character?
I think that honestly was a part of it. I think, I wonder if people honestly too, this is a movie that was done during the Cold War. It was a movie about America's rivalry with Russia. And that was obviously huge throughout the 80s. And I wonder if people honestly thought Dolph Lundgren was Russian, and
totally,
if that even played into it, because one of the first starring roles he gets after Rocky IV is Red Scorpion, where he plays this Russian soldier. He's the hero of the movie, but still, I wonder if people are just that Russian guy, And I think he gets put in a couple of movies where he seems to be an awkward fit. Someday we'll probably far in the future, so I can just say this now. I actually like his Punisher film, but he is an odd choice for that role, especially at where his acting talents were at that point, because he's someone who got better as he went along at acting, and I think I bet you if he was here with us he would admit that. It took him a while to kind of find his footing as an actor. So it's probably a combination of typecasting, because people had a hard time of seeing him as not the scary Russian villain, but also maybe they weren't patient enough to wait for him to kind of develop those acting skills, and just saw him as this big lunk who could only be used as kind of a thug or something like that.
Yeah. Well, moving on to Rocky 5, we've already talked about it, so like we're just kind of revert to what we said before. Rocky's at his low point of the franchise, and goes back to the street level, of the first movie.
Yeah, his best friend Paulie, another key person in the series, played by Burt Young. Rocky did that thing. He stupidly let his buddy, his brother-in-law, handle all his finances, and he's like lost it all, and so Rocky and Adrian and their son are forced to move back into their old neighborhood. So, you actually see like in Rocky 2 and in 3 and 4, they were living in this like giant mansion. And now this is a return to his root story. And this is where the hate, I know this is where a lot of the hate for Rocky 5 comes from, is the villain of the film.
Yeah.
Because Rocky takes this young fighter under his wing and says like, I can't fight anymore. I've lost all my money, but I his desire is obviously if he could still fight, he could get that money back, but he can't. He's got doctors telling him, you fight again, you're going to die. The fight with Drago took too much out of your brain. You can't fight anymore. So instead he says, okay, well, I'll become a trainer, and he takes this young fighter under his wing. And that's the fighter Tommy Gunn, played by Tommy Morrison. Now, Tommy Morrison was an actual fighter at the time. That's why they decided to use him.
And definitely not an actor.
No, he's bad. He's very bad.
Like he's horrendous. He's horrendously bad.
He has no screen presence, unfortunately.
No.
And so he is like, and I get that. Like, so I think that is obviously the albatross around like this movie's neck, which is too bad. But it all culminates in what I actually think is a really awesome ending. Like, I think the street fight between Rocky and Tommy at the end is great. Like, so that's where when people say, like, "Oh, that movie sucks," it's like, I don't know, that movie's doing some pretty interesting things, and it does have an awesome fight at the end. So whatever. Even the moment, I know it's ridiculous, but the moment where like Mickey's ghost like appears to him during the street fight, so stupid. I love it.
Well, then the franchise is on ice for 16 years.
Yeah.
And
I thought it was done. I mean, I'd never really, for a long time, there was like, and I remember so much to the point where one complaint during that 16 years, one complaint I always had about Rocky 5 was I thought Rocky should have died at the end.
Right.
And because I knew that was originally an idea, right? They had talked about that. And I always said like, and I was, when I was like, my idea of like, oh, the best drama always ends with like the character dying.
Totally,
right?
totally.
But just felt like, why didn't he, right? This could have been a more like tragic, interesting story. And obviously I'm glad that's not what they did, because we eventually get the comeback.
Yeah. And Rocky Balboa comes out, and it's awesome. It really shows off Stallone's acting. It goes back again, street level. Back to, Rocky's older at this point, obviously. He runs a restaurant.
Which, again, is great, because that's actually something a lot of athletes do in their later years. Yeah. And
he's, again, criminally underrated for his acting. I will defend Stallone's acting forever. This one especially. He's so good. Was he nominated for this movie as well?
I don't think so. No, he definitely got accolades for this, but I don't believe he was nominated.
Oh, no, he was nominated in Creed. That's what it was. That's what it was. Well, yeah, I really thought Rocky Balboa was good. The only issue here, though, and is my big issue, is what we alluded to before. They choose to kill Adrian off screen. She succumbs to cancer, and I felt, I'm gonna say it here, I felt that it's a complete betrayal of that character. I don't like that Adrian just purely becomes this plot point, you know? And their romance, again, we can't talk enough about how big this romance is, but Rocky Balboa I think that's my biggest problem with it. I love everything else that's happening. I love bringing in, what's his name, Milo Ventimiglia, from Heroes fame, is playing his long-lost son. I like bringing him in and grounding that drama as they have to reconnect. I love the idea of an old fighter getting back in the ring to prove his worth or whatnot, and I think it's really good, but it's hard for me to get over the Adrian thing. How about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I mean, I thought it's an odd choice to not include her. I honestly think... I feel like it was an easy way out for Stallone, because one thing we should say about Rocky Balboa is it's very much kind of a remake of the first one, in that again, Rocky is now an underdog again, right? It's been a long time. He ends up being medically cleared enough to come back for this one exhibition fight, because like ESPN does this like special computer simulation of what would happen if Rocky Balboa, the great former heavyweight champion, fought the current heavyweight champion, Mason the Line Dixon. What a great name.
Yeah.
Played by Antonio Tarver, who is, like Tommy Morrison, is a actual boxer, but unlike Tommy Morrison, actually has some acting skill. He's pretty good in this.
Yeah.
But he's the current champ, and this computer simulation says that Rocky would win. And that obviously bothers Mason Dixon a lot. He's like, "Are you kidding me? Like, you're saying I can't beat this old white guy?" And then Rocky sees that, and he's kind of like, starts to get this itch again. Like, what would happen if I got in the ring with him? You know? And he gets medically cleared to come back for this one exhibition fight. But he's the underdog, right? No one really expects him to win. And again, it's about can he survive this fight, essentially. And I think Stallone took the easy way out of just killing off Adrian because I think he couldn't figure out a way that would justify Adrian agreeing to that fight.
Oh
like,
yeah, okay.
It's almost like if she's not there, he doesn't have to figure out the scene where he somehow gets her to say okay. Because I just imagine Adrian would be like, no, what are you talking about? We don't need that, you know. Like,
and at this point in her character arc, she would be she runs the house. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way in hell that you're going to convince her to put your life on the line at that age. So that's a very good point. I never really thought of it that way. Yeah, it doesn't. It also doesn't leave room for the father-son dynamic thing, because there's this great scene. I can't remember. Oh, you know what? It wasn't with his son, but I think when he's talking to maybe Polly in the meat market, whatever, the fridge, the fridges, whatever, and he's talking about how he's got this animal inside of him, and he's like, he needs to let it out again.
Are you mad because Adrian left you?
She didn't leave, Paul. She died.
Okay.
You know, sometimes it's hard to breathe. You know, I feel like this beast inside me.
It's okay, Rocco. Please, it's okay.
Is it? Okay.
Again, oh man, fuck, he's good in this movie. Jeez, maybe I gotta rewatch this.
and what's funny is, like, you know, even in a plot element that we don't like, he still finds ways to still make it, you know, touching. And so I don't love that he killed off Adrian before the film. And if you're gonna do it, why at least bring Talia Shire back for like some flashback sequences, right? Like, at least let's see a little bit of her, you know, sick and passing away. So that's maybe part of it too. Is I just wish she was in the movie.
Yeah, the off-screen thing is the problem. Honestly, that is what it is.
But that said, like, the idea of how every day Rocky goes out to the cemetery and he's got a chair like stashed in a tree there.
Yeah.
And he takes the chair out of the tree and sits with Adrian at her grave every day. Oh, it's just so touching, right? And it's like, oh, I don't love that she's not in this, but I love that like cements just how much Rocky loved her, right?
Totally.
That he has to be there every day and just sit with her.
And with that, it takes another long break, the franchise. And we now arrive at 2015, where now, guess what, Trev? We're in Legacy sequel land. We are in passing down to the new generation land. Yeah. And this is the first one of the franchise at this point that Stallone does not write.
Yeah. Like, it really feels like this is the moment where the franchise really kind of goes into like other hands for the most part.
Yes. Yes.
He contributes to the screenplay of this one, but it's kind of new people taking it on.
Yeah. And Ryan Coogler takes it on, and he, you know, went on to make Black Panther, and then the next Wakanda Forever's coming out. And Creed, again, is just awesome. Like, it's just a great legacy sequel. I mean, the trio between Stallone, Michael B. Jordan, and Tessa Thompson just really, really works. And
we should say Michael B. Jordan playing the illegitimate son of Apollo Creed.
Correct.
Yeah,
and
Adonis Creed. Yeah.
What I think is so strong is that Rocky has cancer, and because you're kind of waiting, you're like, oh, maybe Rocky's gonna fight or something, but it's really about him. Oh, how to explain it? It's very emotional because he's leading Michael B. Jordan into this life, but also showing him the wares of it after all these years. You know, brain damage, his body's broken, now he has cancer, but yet he's still training him. And I think they do one of the best montages, if I remember correctly, and stop me if I'm wrong, I can't remember if it's this one or Creed 2, just it's because, again, I've only seen these movies once. But isn't there a training montage where he's training Adonis while also like on his like breathing machines and stuff like that?
I believe. I mean, it's been a while since I've seen Creed. I feel like when you say that, I feel like I have that image in my head, but I don't know if
Right.
it's because you're putting that image in my head. You know, like,
Fair enough. But regardless, I think again, this is another triumph of acting. It really is great for everybody involved. It feels again kind of the same, as the first one.
I mean, that's the kind of crazy thing about this franchise. This franchise is so good and knows what's doing so much. It can have 2 remakes of the first one in a row, and you watch both of them go, yeah, that's great. give me another one of these. You know?
Totally. And then 3 years later, they decide, Creed 2 is going to come out, and now it's the Creed franchise. So Rocky is still in this, definitely a smaller role. I have heard from you that Stallone wasn't too happy about being kind of sidelined.
Yeah.
That's kind of where Stallone's been lately in the last few years of this franchise, is that they've been sidelining him, and
so Stallone was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for Creed.
yeah.
Completely justified. It's again an incredible performance from him. Probably is his best performance since the first one.
Yeah.
And if you remember, he was pretty much, I think, to a lot of people, he was kind of like the odds-on favorite to win Best Supporting Actor.
Totally, I remember that.
People really thought like he's one of those actors who's been around forever. Like the Academy loves doing that at a certain point, right? Like, you've been around for a long time, we'll finally give you an Oscar. This is kind of like your legacy Oscar. And he didn't win. And, he put on a good face about it and everything. But I honestly think, because he did win the Golden Globe, I remember that. And, it was a great speech and everything. And then he did not win the Oscar. And I think that probably stung him a little bit. And I think, I don't want to say, like, I'm just speculating here, but I think maybe he had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder after that. Like, he felt like, wow, this was supposed to be like the culmination of me as Rocky. And I think with Creed 2, where they kind of, I don't want to say sideline the character anymore, but he was like less instrumental to the story.
Yeah.
I just heard stories here and there. You never know how much it's true, but I'd heard it was a little bit more like difficult with him. He was, kind of a little more like, I don't think the character should do this. I don't think this is very important. I think there was some speculation again at the time that maybe they wanted to kill Rocky in this one, and he was like very opposed to that. And ultimately, I don't know. I know this. The one nice thing is it does end with a nice kind of reconciliation between him and his son again. They brought back Milo for that.
Yeah.
And I like that moment. But ultimately, I will admit, I feel like Rocky is kind of superfluous in this one. Like, he doesn't really need to be there. And honestly, I also think Creed 2 makes the Star Trek Into Darkness mistake. I should just call it, like, let's call it the J.J. Abrams mistake, right?
Okay.
Where you say, like, hey, I'm like rebooting this franchise. We're getting into like legacy sequels now. Like, where I could open up this world and do anything I want, but instead let's just go back to the well of the old stuff and let's play on those nostalgia, like those member berries. So like, we could do anything. Well, let's just do Wrath of Khan again. And with Creed 2, it's like they could have just come up with any kind of story, but instead they go back to Drago and Drago's son. And I'm not criticizing those characters who I actually love. I love the dynamic of Ivan Drago and his son in this movie, and we'll say even more about that in a minute. But I just felt like it seemed weird. I remember when they showed the first teaser trailer for this, and you saw like the fighter coming out, and his robe said Drago, and I was like, oh man, really? Like, we're already gonna get into Adonis Creed having to fight all of like his dad's like former opponents. Like, that's kind of something. And I really hope Creed 3. I don't know yet what the story of Creed 3 is, but I hope it's not like, I've seen like rumors about like Clubber Lang's son. It's like, oh please God, like, can we just like not do that?
Yeah, like I hear what you're saying. I do defend Creed 2. I quite enjoyed it, but I think a lot of it has to do with watching everything in a week. Like, it is a little bit of recency bias that I think that happens. It was awesome for me to see that this was kind of a makeshift sequel to Rocky 4. And to me, it felt like a really good capper to, Balboa and Creed's story. So I did quite like that, and I liked the idea of Drago being kind of, after his failings in front of Mother Russia, he's been thrown to the wolves. His country has forgotten him. Nobody likes him anymore, and he's kind of living vicariously through his son now to kind of come up on top, to not make the same mistakes he does, and to fucking win. And I think there was like a little bit of an emotional catharsis for Drago, that one-note supervillain. and I think it shows off Dolph's skills as an actor in this one. So I did.
Yeah,
I
I
did
actually
like
wish
this one.
I do wish he had more scenes in it, honestly. And there, especially the scene between him and Rocky in Rocky's restaurant is great. And I wish I wish they had more interactions throughout the movie. It feels like that. That's what I mean. Like that's why Rocky ends up feeling a little superfluous. Is it feels like it doesn't push that as much as it could have. I think. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to Creed 3. It was pushed back. It was supposed to come out like I think this end of the year, I thought. So now it's I think the spring. But I'm looking forward to that. Michael B. Jordan is actually directing, which is cool. Yeah. His feature film directorial debut, which is cool. Mm-hmm. But should we talk a little bit before we do our ranking? Because I want to end with our ranking. Because we're kind of on a path of Stallone feeling like a man scorned by the franchise at this point. But I guess a few weeks ago, they announced Drago is going to be coming out, or at least in the workings, another spin-off of this franchise. And sounds like Stallone does not like this, did not know anything about it, and went to social media to talk about it. Since then, the Instagram posts have been taken down. Luckily for your great podcast host, Chris, the Italian Stallion Sorgiovanni, I keep receipts, so I screenshotted them for content. And I'm just going to read them out to you, Trev, if you don't mind. There's two of them. They're a little long, but just bear with me. This is now still... I'm not going to do a Stallone impression, by the way. I thought about it, but I don't think I could do it for that long. Another heartbreaker. Just found this out. Once again, Irwin Winkler, this pathetic 94-year-old producer, and his moronic vulture children, Charles and David, are once again picking clean the bones of another wonderful character I created without even telling me. I apologize to the fans. I never wanted Rocky characters to be exploited by these parasites. By the way, I once had nothing but respect for Dolph, but he never told me about what was going on behind my back with the character I created for him. Real friends are more precious than gold. Then he made another post, and he says, and this other post was accompanied by Irwin Winkler biting a piece of Stallone's neck out and like a bloody vampire, which
terrible
is
Photoshop, yeah.
Which is kind of hilarious because he definitely made this. Like all I'm picturing is Stallone like really madly like using Photoshop for the first time,
or like really madly like asking his kids how to use Photoshop. Like...
Totally. So he has this to say. After Irwin Winkler and family suck Rocky dry, presumed to be the most hated, untalented, decrepit producer in Hollywood, and his cowardly children have found their next meal. Drago? Throughout history, so many artists in every industry, recording, painting, writing, you name it, have been destroyed by these bloodsuckers who have destroyed so many families, lining their pockets with other people's work. Hashtag parasite producers, hashtag exploited artists victims.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't mention how a lot of these words have been capitalized, but they are deleted. But yes, Stallone is on a war
there
path.
too, when you read between the lines, because he says like, "Oh, Irwin Winkler's already sucked Rocky dry. Now he's moving on to Drago." That's where you kind of read in between the lines and say, "Oh, he's talking about Creed, right?"
Yes,
like he's already kind of saying like, "I already don't like what they're doing with like the Creed series, but now they're trying to like spin it off into another."
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Because I know you and I talked about it. I was actually quite excited by the announcement of a Drago spinoff. Mm-hmm, and in fact, when I saw Creed 2, which as I said, I had issues with. To be fair, to be clear, I like Creed 2. Don't get me wrong. I will defend Creed 2 also, but I just felt it was the first time ever in the series where I did kind of watch and go like, this is starting to, the tires are starting to just kind of spin a little bit here, you know.
Sure.
But I still liked it. But I remember walking away from it, especially after that like final image of Drago and his son, who have had this really kind of detached relationship, and then you have that great final image of them going for the jog together. And I remember walking out of the film going like, you know what I'd actually like to see is like a movie about them. Like I would love to watch a movie about Ivan Drago and his son. And then the fact that years later they're like, we're actually going to do that, and I was like, oh great, because you and I just said, wouldn't it be awesome if like Dolph Lundgren finally has kind of a big comeback. Mm-hmm. And a movie that kind of, puts him front and center. So, Dolph Lundgren has since said that he and Stallone have cleared the air, that he like called Stallone and talked to him about this. I'm just really worried that Stallone is going to like kill this project.
Dolph also kind of claimed to say he didn't even know about the movie and that it was prematurely announced.
Yeah. I hope they can work this all out because I actually do want Drago to happen. I think it is a great idea. I think there is something really kind of, interesting about this former Soviet hero who lost everything and his country turned their backs on him. and his relationship with that son. It's I, as hosts of Fair Franchise, I think we and just general movie fans, you and I are both sick of like expanded universes and the push to like franchise everything. So it's kind of crazy that I'm actually very in favor of an expanded Rocky universe. But there are these like compelling characters who can justify their own films, and I think it's maybe just because I don't feel like I'm going to be watching stories about them fighting aliens and trying to save the world. It's instead just always these kind of compelling character studies.
And also, I mean, this is a franchise we're talking on Success to Series about. There's 8 good films, good to great.
Yeah.
There's not one bad film in the bunch. That's what's so nuts, is that if they've, done it pretty damn good to masterful 8 times, give me another one. That's fine. I'll take a flyer on Drago, and hopefully it's awesome.
Yeah.
I will say, on the other hand, though, I know when we talked about this in the group message, in our text messages, all these weeks ago, you were a little bit like, basically Stallone, God, he's annoying at this point, right? And I will say, like, I agree to a point, I really do, but on the other hand, sometimes you got to level with maybe like, he does have so much ownership on this character in the sense of like just emotionally, not even financially, because the guy doesn't need any more money, and I don't think he recognizes that either. You know what I mean? Like I truly believe him in my heart of hearts that this is about his relationship personally to this character, and I think that's why it is pissing him off, because he's gonna get paid no matter what. You know what I mean? Like he own part of this character still? Do you even know that, or did they completely bought it out?
Right?
He must, right?
I mean, yeah.
So he's gonna get paid somehow, but I think at this point it is coming down to a truly personal reason, and I think you locking it into that loss of the Oscar is very apt. I think you're right.
Well,
I really do.
Because I agree with you. To me, it's like I struggle to, is he being fairness criticism, or is it more like, and you're right. Like, obviously, of course he should feel ownership for it, and of course he should feel protective. I also do think there's an element where artists are sensitive. Artists are fragile, and I think he sees that the franchise can and is moving on without him. And I think that's like a scary thought, right? To say like, wow, they don't need me in like Rocky movies anymore. And I'm guessing that just like really like sticks in his craw, and that's like kind of what he's actually reacting against, because it's like they never went on and made Rambo movies without him, but they are doing that with Rocky.
Right.
But that's what I mean. Like, I think maybe I was being overly harsh with him, but I also think of like another movie that's not very good. I'll give like the slightest of defenses to it sometimes, but like you look at like what he did with the last Rambo movie, right? Last Blood.
Right.
And it's like, you mean this movie that's where he's not even really playing Rambo, like it doesn't feel like a Rambo movie at all. It's like he's almost like forgot what that character is. And then how he keeps going back to the well of these like increasingly stupid Expendables movies. Like he can't give that up either. And I just like, that's like his, and then like what I heard about, kind of his involvement with Creed 2. And this is where I get concerned. I feel like as he's getting older, that maybe he's becoming one of those, I don't want to say crotchety, but like, he's making like a lot of wrong decisions instead of, kind of working with people a little bit more to really actually preserve the franchises in the proper way.
Do you think I don't want to armchair therapize this or anything, but is there a case to be made that Sylvester Stallone, as we live and breathe, is confronting his mortality? And like, I mean, he's getting older. These characters are gonna live on forever. But like, I'm seeing it a little bit in people I know that are getting older, that they are recognizing and reckoning with. I don't want to say the end. That's not what I mean. I don't want to sound dark and gross and mean. But it is like Stallone's career isn't what it used to be. He doesn't have many of these left in him when he can be the Expendables guy. And I think with this franchise in particular, his first franchise, like this is the character, this is the guy that got him to where he is, being taken away. Do you think Sly is like, fuck, like, are we heading to the end?
I think that's part of it. Like, again, not to get like, you look at Stallone and he's had some work done, he's definitely a guy who, and I think you're right with like the the Expendables movies, they're meant to be this like fun throwback to like the 80s action films. Whether they were that, your mileage may vary, but I think it's very much like a, hey, look at me, I'm still relevant, right?
Totally.
Like I'm still, yes, the Jason Stathams have come along, but I can be in movies with them. In fact, they can be my sidekick, right? I'm still top dog. And so I'm sure there is a little bit. I can trot out Rambo again. I can do another one.
Yeah.
I can still play Rocky if they need me to. So I think because we should also mention he has been in the last couple of years. I can't believe we didn't mention this. He's been talking about doing a Rocky 7. Like, he keeps throwing around this idea of like a Rocky 7 where Rocky trains like a young Mexican fighter and making it like a story about immigration as well, which is also what he tried to hit on in Rambo Last Blood.
Tried with gigantic quotation fingers.
Yeah. So after seeing Last Blood, I don't know how thrilled I am with the idea of a Rocky 7 like hitting on that as well. But yeah, so I think you're probably right that I think it's just as he's getting older, he's starting to be like he's feeling that proprietary ownership more because he feels like the world is leaving him behind a little bit, and that's sad, but yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's not a way to say it like that's being disrespectful at all. Like again, we're both like big Stallone fans, so so it's not. It's more about from a place of, I don't know. This is going to sound corny, but a place of love. Like honestly, it sounds. Yeah. That's why maybe I get it. Like those screaming into his keyboard, I kind of get it.
I just want to reach out to Stallone and say, hey, instead of getting all worked up about this, instead of like worrying about what's happening with the Rocky franchise, instead sit down and concentrate. Forget about the Expendables. Don't try to make another Rambo movie. Let's get Demolition Man 2 going.
Yeah, totally. I was about to say the same thing. Yeah. Another movie I just recently watched with you about a year ago.
Perhaps controversial statement. My favorite Stallone movie. I love Demolition Man.
Yeah, Demolition Man was amazing, or is amazing, and yes, I would. That's not controversial to me. That's also. Yeah. Okay, let's wrap this up. Let's talk rankings here. We'll just kind of. What do you want to do? How do you want to do this?
I'll go first. I'll tell you my rankings first, and I'm going to start at number 1 and work my way down. I just think it makes more sense for this series.
Sure. Yep. Go ahead.
So for me, my favorite is Rocky. And I said, not the first one I saw, but probably at this point, I honestly probably have watched this one the most. I go back to it quite a bit because I do. It's a comfort movie for me. There's something, you have the great fight, you have the great story, but like I said, there's actually something so comforting and always so touching and sweet about the Rocky Adrian scenes. Like, man, that scene where he takes her to the ice rink and he can't skate, but that's what she wants to do, and he just like runs alongside her. It's just, oh my god, it melts your heart every time, and I just think it's like one of the ultimate like romantic stories. So that's my favorite. My second favorite is Rocky Balboa. Wow. I was just really struck at the time by how effectively I thought it, as someone who likes Rocky 5, I thought this is the one where they really got back to the spirit of that first one. That's why I think I like it so much. Like, it's, to me, I love Rockies 2 through 5, but I've often said that Rocky Balboa is the only movie that actually feels like a real sequel to Rocky, like that it feels like it exists in that same world. The other ones don't quite, to me. It's almost like those are like alternate universe Rocky movies, right? So so Rocky Balboa is my second. Then I'd go Rocky 4, because for all the reasons that a lot of people will have it as their favorite one, right? It's just ridiculous. It's just like such a bombastic, insane 80s explosion of everything, and this idea of him forging peace between the U.S. and Russia by winning a boxing match, right? And the hilariously over the top training sequences of him in Russia, like doing all his training with like just logs and trees and cutting down and running through the snow. Just everything about that movie is like excessive. Everything about that movie is stupid, and I love every minute of it. For me, the fourth one would be Creed. Creed was this like incredible breath of fresh air. Yes, it's kind of a remake of the first one again, but as you said, a fantastic performance from Stallone, and just I really fell in love kind of instantly with the character of Adonis Creed. Fantastic performance from Michael B. Jordan, and Tessa Thompson rules as well. Next to be Rocky 3 for me. Clubber Lang is a great villain, super iconic. Mr. T is so much fun in that movie, and so yeah, I like that one quite a bit as well. Next would be Rocky 2. My nitpicky thing with Rocky 2 has always been that I do feel like it's really jarring when you watch them, especially right in a row. And I don't know if you had this experience of where Rocky suddenly feels like a somewhat different character. Like I feel like a lot of his like mumbling and his kind of like sweet stupidity, I feel like is dropped kind of instantly. And I feel like he suddenly feels like smarter and like just kind of a different character in Rocky 2. And another thing, I as much as I like Rocky 2, as I said, I kind of liked the idea that he didn't win the first fight. So to have a sequel that's just like, well, let's make him the champion, I've always been kind of like, all right, I get it, but it's still an enjoyable movie, still quite enjoyable, and I like that you get more Apollo. So that's what I do like about it. Then I have Creed 2. My issues with it, as I said before, I felt like I didn't need the villain to be Drago, but they kind of proved me wrong by making the Dragos dynamic, both of them very, very intriguing, and giving us that great scene with Rocky and Drago. And so I did, and even though it's kind of, this one is the first time I felt like maybe the series was starting to feel too formulaic, still had some good stuff in it. And then Rocky 5. So it is my last one, people. Don't worry. Rocky 5 is my last. But that said, like I said, I like all of these. So it's just a matter of degree. I put it last because it is the one that has the worst villain, unfortunately. Tommy Morrison does kind of really. It's kind of a charisma black hole every time he's on screen. But I do like the realistic look at what can happen to these fighters when they lose everything. And I do like the final fight, the final street fight. So that's my ranking.
Cool. So we have 4 that are perfectly placed, that match, which is cool. And then 2 that are completely reversed.
Right.
So my favorite one is obviously Rocky. Just a masterpiece. I mean, what's more to say? Again, I fell in love with Adrian right away. And I think that's the heart and soul of these movies. And yeah, just really, really gets me emotional. The first one. Like, again, I've only seen it once, which is weird to say. But got really, really emotional on that one. A real reminder. This is my ranking, actually, when I watched these movies for the first time. I just wanted to bring that up. I didn't rejig them. I wanted to give you what I wrote back in February. And I ranked them on my Letterboxd account, which is both our links in the podcast app. I then moved onto Rocky 2. Rocky 2 felt like the absolute perfect part 2. And I love that you said earlier that Rocky 3 makes it seem like now we're in a franchise because 1 and 2 are so closely, contained in that way. And that's what I loved about it is that Rocky 1, yes, he loses. Then Rocky 2, he's like, motherfucker, go win, and that line, like you just get, like I got goosebumps again. When Adrian goes win, you're just like, fucking let's rock this guy, Yeah. So it just hits. So I love Rocky 2.
There's one thing I want you to do for me.
What?
Come here.
What?
Win. Win.
Third on the list is Creed. Creed is one of those perfect legacy sequels in the vein of like, Top Gun Maverick, like something that just really, really extends this franchise in a meaningful way. And Michael B. Jordan is fantastic. I don't even really like Tessa Thompson as an actor, but she's very good in this, and I liked her a lot. And I like it feels like a real filmmaker made it, and Ryan Coogler is a real filmmaker. And I just really, really loved Creed. Number 4, Rocky 4. Again, pure 80s cheese, fun as hell, iconic as ever, just a blast, a complete blast to watch. Then Rocky 3 is my fifth in the ranking. Fun, another fun one, like just a good time. You know what I mean? Like three is just a good time. Then I moved to Rocky Balboa for my ranking of 6th. I love it so much, except for how it treats Adrian's character. So it's just something that, in my mind, is a little unforgivable. But again, all of these films I like to love. You know what I mean? So again, it's still somehow it works. Number 7 on the list, Creed 2. I just think it caps off Balboa and Creed stories very, very well. I think it's very. It has a few finales to it, but man, just a nice little capper to some. Well, I guess not the franchise, but you know what I'm trying to say. And then last is Rocky 5 for exactly what we've said. It's got some great themes. It shows some realistic things with athletes, but it just it loses its way. It just loses its way overall. But those are 8 fucking awesome movies, man.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly, I want to go watch them all right now.
Yeah, no, 100%.
I didn't rewatch them for this because I was like, no, I can definitely just talk about this franchise. But now I'm like, yeah, actually, I got to go rewatch this franchise.
Yeah, I think I will. I think I really will. Just rockin' movie. How many franchises can you say that have 8 good to great entries?
Well, and they've been running this long too, right? And that's what's the incredible thing. It's been running this long. It has 8 entries that all are essentially, like I said, kind of the same movie, right? Now, as we said, there is some differences. Like, 1 and 2, like one feels different than 2. 1 and 2 feel very different than 3 and 4, which are kind of like a cartoon. Then you get back to the realism. Then I think with the Creed films, you even go in like a different sort of like realism, right? That has like a different vibe too, because now you're adding in also like kind of the more like like the hip hop world kind of gets involved into it. It's got this like different vibe to it, which is like awesome to see it expand and bring that in with Coogler's touch. So to go that long, to have 8 movies where you always go like, I basically know what's gonna happen in this, right? Like the guy's either gonna win or like go the distance at the end. There's no drama of that, right? But still, like, it works every time, and it like every time it makes you like pump your fist, and the fights are always great, even though I said they're not very realistic as boxing matches.
No.
They're like nobody blocks a punch in the Rocky movies. Everyone just like lets every punch hit them. It's but it's just so exciting. Oh, we didn't even talk. When we talked about Creed, we didn't talk about the incredible like single shot boxing match.
Oh, yes. Yeah. That's a good one. That's a good one. The Oner's awesome in that.
Yeah. But yeah, so just this franchise rules, and like I said, it's only 2 entries in the 80s, but I do think 3 and 4 were so like omnipresent in the 80s, and I think in particular, I do believe a lot of people's favorite is Rocky 4 because of how just so over the top it is. And it's so over the top and so ridiculous. I don't know about you, but I still have not even bothered to watch that like rejiggered director's cut that Stallone has done. No. I'm kind of like afraid to watch it. I've heard it's fine, but it's kind of like, I know he wanted to make it like a more serious film, and I'm like, no. Like I don't. Totally. I like how dumb Rocky 4 is. I like the robot, which I know he took out. So it's like, no. Let's just leave it alone.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think we got the word out on this franchise?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope after this, some people actually finally check out this little indie gem, and see what we're talking about. It's
pretty amazing that truly an indie gem that was the first Rocky, 1976, has grown to, like I said, $1.7 billion worldwide, and just captured generations, continues to grow, getting new generations, and doesn't just rest on nostalgia. There's genuine character stuff going on, and which makes it really exciting to watch. And I'm very, very happy. I mean, it took a long, long time for me to get to them, and I honestly felt fucking stupid how long it did take me. It was one of those realizations, but man, what a series! What a series!
It's nice to know that like 8 movies put together that tell this like stirring, emotional, romantic, moving story, all put together, made as much money as one Doctor Strange movie.
Ugh. You're just, oh god. We were having such a good time.
I know. I always have to ruin it. I'm sorry.
You got to bring me. But now all I'm thinking is like failure to franchise stuff. Now I'm just getting PTSD for all the movies we're gonna have to see. This is my one glimmer of hope. No, but yeah, this was great. So that'll do it for this episode of Success to Series. Next episode, we're getting back to our regular scheduled programming with Failure to Franchise, with Streets of Fire from 1984. Then we're moving on to Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins from 1985, then Masters of the Universe 1987, and then Shocker 1989 to cap off this 3-month event, Fall Back to the 80s. This has been a blast because, Flash Gordon, I was disappointed with. Buckaroo Banzai, disappointed with. This was nice to jump into further disappointment. I can only think of. Hopefully not. I mean, maybe I'm just screwing around, but.
Well, I mean, to be fair, you were only disappointed in Buckaroo Banzai because you're stupid. Now, I'm gonna go on a limb here, Chris, and I'm gonna guess that you know next to nothing about Streets of Fire, correct?
I know next to nothing about the next 2 movies.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, 3 out of 4 actually. I would say that I have no idea.
Right,
but
well.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I want to. Yeah. Sometimes I can be stupid because you've been the most stupid. Okay, so sometimes I got to take it away from you. Okay. But no, this was great. So yeah, follow along at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2F Pod on all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. Reviews are awesome. Thanks for all who contribute. And just join the tribe, hit that subscribe, and I'm looking forward more falling back to the 80s, man.
Yeah, it's a blast. There's definitely a few of these I'm very, very excited to talk to you about.
Awesome.
We went the entire time without either of us doing a "Yo, Adrian."
I know. Yeah, we actually didn't do any impressions.
Yeah. Unless you put that in as the post-credit scene.
Yes, I have all the power.